Welcome to Adventures in Accessibility, a podcast that explores the far reaches of disability, access, and inclusion, with your host, Emily Schumann.
Welcome back, everyone. Today's guests are Johnny, Jeff, and Becki Agar. Johnny gained international attention when he walked a mile in his church's annual 5K as a person with cerebral palsy. Even with a lifetime of physical therapy, before the 5K, the longest distance he'd ever been able to walk was 23 steps. Since that incredible feat, Johnny and his father Jeff have partnered in hundreds of races, including the infamous Ironman World Championship in Kona, Hawaii, which was chronicled by NBC. Johnny has been featured on The Today Show, Inside Edition, People, USA Today, NBC Nightly News, Huffington Post, and ESPN's Sportscenter. His tenacity and indelible spirit have caught the attention of Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps and the sports apparel company Under Armour. So much so that Under Armour placed him in two of their commercials, one with Phelps and one with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Now, Johnny gives motivational speeches to inspire others to overcome their challenges and chase their dreams. Among his other roles, Johnny serves as athletic ambassador for the Cerebral Palsy Foundation. He's proud to have earned a dual major bachelor's in sports management and business administration from Aquinas College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Jeff, more commonly referred to as Johnny's dad, was never an endurance athlete and only 12 or so years ago had never completed a 5K race. His main goal is helping Johnny achieve his dreams. Jeff is married to Becki, and together they have 3 children, Johnny, Annie, and Gracie. Becki fundraises and advocates for organizations that have been instrumental in helping children with disabilities be as independent as possible on their journeys through life. But she will tell you her proudest accomplishment is being mother to her 3 children, Johnny, Annie, and Gracie.
All right. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here on the podcast today. We're so excited to have you all.
Thanks for having us, Emily.
Thanks for having us, Emily.
Absolutely. So listeners are aware we have all 3 of the Team Agar members here. We have Becki, Johnny, and Jeff. So I'd like to ask Johnny, what can you share with us about your disability and kind of how that impacts your daily life and how it informs what you do?
So I have something called cerebral palsy. It's a disconnect between my brain and my muscles. So my brain sends signals to my muscles that allows it to be mixed, so my muscles don't cooperate as well as they should. And so simple movements like brushing my teeth to, going to bed at night, I need certain help with but can get through them. And so
I think the biggest thing that I found with people who don't know much about cerebral palsy is they think it's a mental deficiency, right? But in reality, people with cerebral palsy really are very intelligent, even if they can't speak. Your tongue is a muscle, your diaphragm is a muscle. And so that affects speech. And some people with cerebral palsy can't verbalize, and some are very well, can speak very well. And that's the other thing with cerebral palsy. It's such a wide gamut of things that can be involved. You could walk with a slight limp, or you could be totally involved. But the majority of the people with cerebral palsy are very intelligent, very even gifted people. So
absolutely. So at the start of the episode, our listeners heard your biographies, all about the amazing work and accomplishments that you all have done. So I'd like to hear from each of you, of all of your accomplishments and things that you do, what is the work that you're most proud of and what are you most passionate about?
I would say beyond all the races and things, our main goal is advocacy and just telling people more about disability than what we have the power to do. I would say that's what we're most proud of, and the racing and everything just supplements that type of thing. So
I'm most proud of the fact that Jeff and I raised Johnny to believe that he didn't have any limitations whatsoever. And even when he was little, he always thought he was going to be an astronaut or a firefighter. And for me, that was music to, our parents' ears, because he he didn't realize, how he can't climb a ladder, or, he can't do the things that most firefighters need to do with his body. In his mind, he was going to be that. And so I think that's one of the proudest things for us, for me anyway. And then the other thing is being able to see him inspire people. We thought when we started this journey, he would, be able to help people with disabilities. We found that he has done that, but it's even more so. He's touching people who have any sort of challenge whatsoever in their life. And I think, as a mom, to be able to watch people come up to him and say, "You changed my life. I was struggling with X, Y, or Z. And I feel like if you can do what you're doing, I can do something." And so that's what I'm most proud of.
Yeah, I'd say, one of the things I'm the most proud of is that Johnny really bridges the gap between people who have a disability or have a challenge and people that are more able-bodied, more typical. We hate to use the word normal. We like to use the word typical of what, because it resonates better with somebody. But Johnny really bridges the gap, and he helps people a lot through his sense of humor and his knowledge of sports, where people might be hesitant to talk to, especially a kid sitting in a wheelchair. People come up and Johnny will start a dialogue with them and talk about things that they have that the typical person has interest in, right? And so it helps to bridge that gap. And then in racing and everything, it's not typical for someone to be in some of these endurance races that he's involved in. And it's really opened doors, and especially him walking at the end of races has been really huge, because before that, we really didn't ever see kids getting up out of their walk or out of their chairs or whatever they were in, their joggers, and trying to walk the finish. Now we see it all the time. So I think it opens the doors for people's minds of what they can accomplish. And Johnny's really kind of helped bridge that gap, and it makes able-bodied people much more receptive. And they also look out for what kids can do way beyond what they might have thought they could ever accomplish.
I love that. So what does a day in your life consist of typically?
I like to get up.
When he's training, yeah.
When I'm training, I like to get up pretty early and do some stretching and certain things. With disabilities or with cerebral palsy especially, you'll find that it's very important for you to do a lot of stretching in order to maintain mobility throughout the day. So I like to do a lot of stretching in my chamber of games, I call it, downstairs.
In the workout room?
In the workout room, but it's really, really beneficial for me. And then after that, I have a good breakfast, and Mom usually does a wonderful job of that. And then doing whatever the day calls for in that. And then one day, or maybe some days, I'll go to my conductive education therapy center that I go to. It's located in Grand Rapids here, and then I'll come home and veg out for the rest of the day. So and catch up on the happenings, social media throughout the day too.
Yeah, and in a typical day for me, usually 6 out of 7 days I'm doing some kind of training. In the morning, typically starting around 5 o'clock, I'll usually do a bike workout at the Y and maybe a strength workout, and then I work all day at in my job, and then some kind of workout in the evening. So either a swim or a run at night. But it's typically 6 out of 7 days a week. Usually get Monday off, but you're doing at least one event, if not a couple, every single day, just trying to stay on top of the 3 main events you do, which is biking, swimming, and running. But then strength training is critical, and trying to stay on top of nutrition is a big deal as well. So there's pretty much every day you got to really plan things out really, really well, but it's at least one workout, if not 2 workouts every day.
I do some of those workouts too with Dad.
And you walk, right?
And I walk 2 days a week too.
Yeah, and the weekends we usually do our long bike rides and long runs. And so Johnny will try to go with me as best he can if the weather's okay, where he's out there for anywhere from like 3 to 6 hours biking and 2 to 3 hours running. So it takes a tremendous amount of time.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, is training and preparing for these competitions your full-time kind of work, or do you have other projects and things that you're involved in as well?
Yeah, and I have a real job. So I'm the vice president and CEO of a company called Weiss Technic, where we make environmental test chambers. So it's fairly demanding. And so really, you got to plan your days. Like on a weekend, if I don't just sit down and watch football for a couple hours, if I'm going to watch a football game, then I'll plan my bike ride inside where I'll be biking while I'm watching it. So you try to plan everything around working out as best you can. And you try to squeeze in sleep as well. So I squeeze in a lot of naps here and there, trying to stay on top of the overall sleep that you need to be able to recover.
There will be some days when he gets home, after working out in the morning and then working full time, and then he gets home and I'll be talking mid-sentence and he's out. He's that exhausted. He's pretty wiped out.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like it takes a lot of discipline.
It's a commitment. It's a great one because you end up being a lot healthier out of it, but it's definitely a commitment. Endurance sports, and especially long distance endurance sports, is a major commitment. Probably for the better. I always joke around that Johnny couldn't get involved in something like stamp collecting as a hobby instead of endurance sports, but we like it. It's a great community for sure.
Yeah. And, that's one of the things that, some of the other interviews you've done, I heard you all talking about is that, Jeff, you're not particularly interested in this type of sporting activity, right? And it's something you do to really enrich Johnny's life.
Yeah, my interest level in endurance sports, probably from a range of 0 to 100 to be very close to 0. So when I was younger, I played baseball. And in baseball, you run a few sprints now and then. There's no endurance running at all, at least back in the day when I played. And if the weather conditions aren't great, you don't play. If it's a little rainy, then you postpone things. Where in endurance sports, you are doing, swing, biking, running for crazy distances. And it doesn't matter what the weather is. You're out there training in it or running and doing a race in it. So not a sport I would even remotely consider that I would have wanted to be involved in at this point in life or any point in my life at all. But Johnny loves it. And he did a race with a group early on. I'm sure he'll tell you about it, but he just loved being able to participate as more of an athlete than just a bystander. And so that kind of got us into it, and he loves it. And so now here we are.
And was this sort of tandem competition style that you guys do, did that already exist? Were people already doing that, or was that something you came up with?
So it was a group called Team Point that did it first. They were a father-son team. He had cerebral palsy like me, probably much more involved the case of cerebral palsy than I do, but his dad realized how much he loved it, kind of like me, and decided, okay, this is what we do. And so
they really paved the way
for it. They were out of Massachusetts.
But then years ago, so when we had a neighbor that actually approached us and said, hey, Johnny, would you want to he was a triathlete, and he said, would you like to do a triathlon? There's this group that I heard about, and we'd like to push and pull you as a group of 3 people. And they take kids with disabilities. Well, this group is called My Team Triumph, and they take kids with disabilities and adults, through races so they can experience what it feels like to cross a finish line. And so years ago, that was Johnny's first race, and he absolutely loved it. And then my husband, Jeff, and Annie both said, my daughter, Annie, said, it would be great if maybe we can do one of these and push Johnny in it. And that's kind of how it evolved into happening.
When you get involved with the endurance community, you'll find that they're the most positive people you'll ever meet in your life, and they always told us, hey, if you can do a 5K, you can do a 10K, or if you can do a 10K, you can do a 25K. So they were always challenging us to up our ante a little bit, and so pretty soon after that, we were doing half Ironmans and Ironman races and things, and it's just been a wonderful community to be a part of, especially when I have especially when I have different abilities and that sort of thing. So it's been such a wonderful experience, and I'm so grateful for everything that Mom and Dad and my sisters go through to make sure we can race and everything.
It's really interesting when you think about the people with special challenges and then the endurance communities. You would think they couldn't be further apart. You've got some of the greatest athletes and some of the fittest people in the world that do a sport, and then you have a bunch of these kids that can, many times can barely do anything or in a very limited basis. But bringing those two groups together it gives people a lot of purpose. So if you're the athlete, a triathlon and like Ironman distance races are very, very selfish sports where you're out there for hours and hours at a time on your own, doing just things just for yourself. But these people started doing things, and like the My Team Triumph group, they wanted to create an experience for these kids that never would have had this opportunity. So then you're melding, these groups are amazingly, and if you've run across this too, that a lot of times people with special needs, especially Johnny and the kids he hangs out with at the Connected Learning Center, they have the greatest attitudes, super positive all the time. So a common link that these groups have, even though they're not even remotely close athletically, just personality wise and mentally and just with their outlook on lives is so super positive that they all get along great because they're all just so excited to be doing these things. And it's a great melding of two different worlds you'd never expect to come together. And it's led to some incredible things, but the stuff Johnny's been involved in and the people we've seen get pulled into it because they may not have been a runner, but they'll go out and run with a kid with special needs. And then it gets them to become a runner. And that's how obviously we get involved too, where I was not an endurance runner at any kind of endurance sport, but you get pulled into this environment and then you get around all these people that are, like Johnny said, super positive. And you start believing it because they've done it, right? And they go, wow, you could do so much more. And suddenly you are doing more. And there are so many times where I told Johnny, I've hit my physical peak. One day we did a 10-mile run. And I said, that is it. That's the farthest my body can ever go. And then a couple weeks later, one of these people in our run group says, well, you run 10 miles. You should, you could do the 25K, which is 15 and a half miles. And then you immediately go, wow, really? And you start believing it. Then they said, well, you could do a marathon and then a triathlon. And it just keeps on growing. But you get around people that are super positive, whether they're a group of people with special needs like Johnny is in, or these endurance athletes, it opens doors and opens your mind up to things you never would have thought possible.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting connection that you made there between people with disabilities and athletics and the mindset and sort of the resilience. That kind of comes naturally to both groups. Switching gears just a little bit, I'd love to know a little bit more about, your experience with the Americans with Disabilities Act. When did you learn about it and how has it impacted your life, if at all?
We've always had the opportunity to kind of do our research and really find out what's out there, because if you're not aware of what's out there, you're basically doing yourself a disservice. And so when we found out about, the different ways in which the Americans with Disabilities Act opened up pathways for people with disabilities to get involved with different things, it was really, really special for us. And
I think one of the first times that we really started delving into the ADA is we had gone on a trip to San Diego. Jeff had some business that was there, and at the time we only had two children, and Johnny was in a manual chair. He didn't have a power chair, and we took him to the San Diego Zoo, and we had no idea how hilly it was in the San Diego Zoo. And when we had a manual chair, so we had to push him up these hills. And I had a friend that was with me. And so I'm not exaggerating. I would push Johnny and then she would push me, pushing Johnny. And then my daughter would push her, pushing me, pushing Johnny, because it was so steep. And we had no idea. There was nothing on the website, nothing letting us know that we did get there. And on the, maybe fifth hill, there was a sign on the top that said, not advised for manual chairs.
On the top.
At the top of the hill. And it was about the fifth hill we hit. So they weren't prominent around there.
So I got a picture of me with the sign with my hands up in the air, like a roller coaster.
Yeah. But I think that was then from that we thought, there's got to be something that's better, letting people know. And this is not just people in wheelchairs. This is for, people in walkers and people in, strollers and things like that.
Right.
And so we started looking into the ADA and what kind of things were available for people like that. So, and then Jeff came up with an idea for a website, and we named it Johnny's Pass. Jeff, you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, so I got to give Johnny probably more credit than me on it, because we were at Boy Scout camp and we were talking through things, and Johnny had to come up with a project for his the computer mirror badge. And then, we're talking about certain things that he could do. And so we were just kind of brainstorming about things. And we had talked about, the whole accessibility problem, the not knowing, and even though things will say, if you look at their website, it says we're accessible, right? But there are so many places, yeah, it's accessible, but not with a power wheelchair, or not being able to get into a bathroom, or if you have to transfer from one, from your chair to the seat. It just doesn't really spell it out. And the average person might look at things and say, yeah, it looks like you could get in here. But if you actually have gotten around in a wheelchair, then you've seen, or, in somebody in a walker or something else, you'll see that, hey, there's no way you're really going to get in there. So the concept at the time was he just had to come up with some ideas. And for his merit badge, he'd kind of talked about, well, let's make a website that would be able to share information about accessibility to people. And then from there, we decided, well, it really sounds like a great idea. There weren't that many things out there that did anything like it. So then we went ahead and hired some programmers and created johnnypass.com. It was kind of like a mixture of, if you think about the food app Yelp, and those types of things, where it gets individual people who are like with Yelp, it's people who are, a lot of them are foodies, right? So they want to share their experience, while we're looking for people that actually have dealt with getting around different places and have them evaluate, just so that you didn't get somewhere like the San Diego Zoo and realize, hey, we're never going to be able to get around this place. It's just so tough. So that was kind of the genesis of it, and it evolved into the website as it is today. And we're trying to keep it growing, and it's one of those things where it's word of mouth and people putting in ratings on companies or locations that will be the best thing for everybody else to be able to go to and say, hey, can I get into this place or not?
So is it currently just specific to your local area, or is it national?
It's across the entire country. Yeah. So anywhere in the country. I mean, there's more places rated locally where we've been, and for other people we know and have been to, but it's available for anywhere in the world. If you go into johnnyspass.com, and then if you were to look for restaurants near San Diego or something, it ties in with Google, and it searches just like Google Maps would, of showing the map locations. And if a place that has a rating on it, it'll be color coded in red. And if it hasn't been rated yet, all the businesses are there, but you can open it up and you can put a rating in it. So if you've been somewhere, you can, it's super easy to use. And the biggest things are things like, what's the parking like? What's the accessibility like? Whether bathrooms are a big deal, right? Especially when you're in a wheelchair. So the bathroom accessibility is huge, and then just kind of getting around the whole place. If you can identify those key areas that say, "Yep, it's a good place to go to," it's really kind of a critical thing.
We tried to eliminate a lot of the unknown for people, and then so that they didn't have a San Diego Zoo experience like we did. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So many places we've been to, then you could put comments in there. So there's, I just happen to think there's this great ice cream place that, and one of our friends had said, yeah, we went there with our kid in a wheelchair, and we found out once we got there, it's the most popular ice cream place in the Sydney area. But they got there, they just couldn't get around, couldn't get into the place. And it was really disappointing for the child. So that was in the back of our minds too, of, well, it'd be nice to know these types of things. And when you look up that place, it spells it out, where if you want to get around inside, you're going to have a heck of a time doing it.
Bad rating. Our hope was that it would encourage them to
make it more
accessible and find ways to make their rating better, I guess.
Yeah.
And what I love about it is that since it sort of relies on the community to rate the businesses, for sure that it's people who really have tested the functionality of it, and it's not just sort of like based in the standards.
Data-driven type deal.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like these guys just said, it's ideal if it prompts them to make it even more accessible, right? I mean, there's like, you've probably seen places that barely meet the minimum for ADA requirements, and ones who just embrace it and say, we're going to really go all in on making this accessible kind of for anybody. And there's a tremendous amount of people that have disabilities, but just with the population getting older and older, at some point, all of us are either going to be in the ground or in a wheelchair, most likely. So, and we're still going to want to go places. So it's great for anybody not to have a disability, but you can just be older or hard to get into, or you've been injured. Like people will hurt themselves and are in a wheelchair for a while, or on a scooter or something. And it opens the door up to know we're not going to get shocked when we get there and we're not going to be able to get around. We can know ahead of time if there's an issue.
Yeah. So in addition to athletes and app developers, you guys are all authors as well, right? So
2 of us are authors.
Tell us a little bit about your book. It's called The Impossible Mile.
The power in living life one step at a time, yes. And whenever I would go to speaking engagements, people would always ask me, that was a great story, but I want to know the how, the why, different people that encourage you to live life this way. And so after I had graduated from Aquinas College, I started to kind of sit down and get my thoughts on paper, and having Mom join in on the project was really, really cool because she could tell you some things that I couldn't tell you. And so, like when I was a young boy, different things that Mom and Dad had to go through. And so it was really cool to get my parents' perspective, same thing. So, and some of the things I didn't know. So we had a great time kind of both reminiscing stories and going through stories that I didn't even know. So, and gave me a better appreciation for them even more. So it was really, really a special thing to write. And I hope people enjoy it as much as we did. So
it's Johnny's, it's more of a memoir, right? And, but it gives people an idea of, the mindset of, what we were thinking and why we, for a long time, we never wanted anybody to say that Johnny had cerebral palsy. And it wasn't because we were embarrassed of it or, in denial. We got that quite a bit. It was because we didn't want any limitations on him until he was able to make that decision himself. And so the book kind of shows how we went about doing that, how it changed Johnny's mindset, how he accepted things and didn't accept things, and the struggles that he had and the struggles we had, and ultimately how it led to, some of the great things that Johnny's been able to experience in his life. Because, if you would have looked at him he was born, 11 weeks early at 29 weeks, 3 pounds, 7 ounces. On event for a couple of days. And if you'd have looked at him, he was a pretty scrawny little kid, a lot of machines hooked up to him, but you would have never guessed he would be on one of the greatest sports networks in the world. Right. So I think the book shows kind of that journey toward how he got that way. And like I mentioned, he always thought he was going to be an astronaut or a firefighter, and those limitations were not in his mind at all. And so I think I'm very happy with how the book came out and what kind of message it gives. And our faith is very strong. And so I think that resonates throughout the book as well.
Yeah, I think Becki did an amazing job of capturing, Johnny's thoughts and emotions, but putting it into a story that reads incredibly well. It shows everything going on behind the scenes. She's been a person who journals a great part of her life. So she had exactly what she was thinking at the time, and he could write it and put it into the book that way versus trying to remember it. You can remember it with maybe a little more embellishment and things, and you gloss over the negatives, but having exactly the emotions, both positive and negative at the time, really makes it much more real. And so I think she did an amazing job. And obviously Johnny has a lot of great things to say. We call him his sisters call him the rolling bumper sticker, because he has all these great thoughts he comes up with. But I think together they put together a phenomenal book. And so my
Gosh, we didn't even pay him to say that. Done.
So yeah, but I think they did a great job. Becki's a great author and encouraging to write her second one. So.
Yeah, that's remarkable, and we'll certainly put the link to the book in our show notes so that people can pick that up.
Yeah, it's also on Audible too. I made sure of that so people can whatever if they're visually or whatever, if they have a problem, if they have a visual impairment, they can view it different ways. Or
yeah, and the main endorser of the book was the greatest Olympian of all time, Michael Phelps. So he and Johnny become social media buddies. But I think it's a great book, and a lot of people have been motivated by it.
That's wonderful. Well, speaking of motivation, I'd love to hear from each of you. What would you say to our listeners who are feeling defeated right now, either because of a personal struggle or from current events?
I would just say that, any struggle that you're going through is just temporary. And if you take it one step at a time, you don't look at the big picture. You take these small steps each day, and you break it down into smaller pieces, then it's much easier to handle. And you make improvements each day, dedicate yourself to making improvements. I think, you're well on your way. So don't worry about the small stuff either. So.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of setbacks in my life, and I've always relied on my faith and believing that, God had a better plan, and I just had to have faith that plan was going to work out. And I think raising Johnny, I think we did the same thing. It's a wonderful feeling knowing that somebody has your back. And so what you're experiencing and whatever that might be and how hard it might be, knowing that somebody's got a better plan for you is always what I've fallen back on and what we've tried to teach our kids to fall back.
Yeah, and I would say too, don't be afraid to ask questions. There's no question is a dumb question, or
and to get
and to be open to services like you provide is really, really important. So there's people to help you. You just need to be open to it, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think adding to that is just the fact that, especially with Johnny, he fails so many times, and it can be horribly discouraging when you keep trying and you don't do well. And as an adult, especially, when you fail to something, it can almost be kind of embarrassing, and it makes you want to stop. And I think back to part of our journey. Early on, we started doing triathlons. We actually got invited to do the toughest Ironman competition in the world, which is the Ironman World Championship in Kona, Hawaii. And that was 2016, when we were so ill prepared, but it was such a great opportunity. And we had told Johnny his whole life that you got to take on challenges, even if you're going to fail, you got to give it a try. And so then it would have been hypocritical for me, given the opportunity to try to do that race with him, to say, no, we're not ready, so we shouldn't even give it a try. But we did, and we failed at it. And the interesting thing is, outside of that, it's fairly humiliating when a million people watch you fail at something. And Becki made a lot of comments at the time of, hey, something good can come out of this if we wanted to. If you work hard at it and you embrace that it's just a stepping stone kind of approach versus an end of the line kind of a problem. And so and I was, of course, in my infinite wisdom, said, nothing good's going to come of this. This is horrible. And so, but since then, if you look at, we've tried to keep getting invited back to do the race in Hawaii, hopefully with a lot more experience and better equipment and better technique and training, all that kind of stuff. So then you look at it over the last several years, because we didn't make the race in Hawaii the first time around, we kept training like crazy. Johnny got linked up with Michael Phelps, ended up being in a commercial for Under Armour with Michael Phelps. And then subsequently that was a regional ad in Michigan. And then Under Armour put Johnny in a national or a global campaign with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, right? The great, with one of those most well-known actors on the planet. None of those things would have happened had we made it through Hawaii the first time, because we had no reason to keep on fighting and can keep pushing to do well, and then again do further and further in these races. So just great things have come out of the fact that we call it our successful failure, but because we failed the first time through, now amazing things have happened. And now we recently got invited via CBS and through Peyton Manning, the Hall of Fame football player. He was the one on a CBS show invited us to come back to Hawaii 6 years later, when we're now much more prepared, a lot better idea of what's going on. And you can say that what was deemed to be a failure, that was just one step in the process. And so Johnny has taught us that of you failing all the time, but he doesn't look at it as failure. It's just part of the process. That's what you go through to try to be successful. And we're in much better position than we were back then. And we're talking to folks like yourselves and then other people that Johnny's able to get his message out. So if the goal was for Johnny to motivate people, get his message out, inspire other people, we're much better off having failed originally than we were if we had succeeded right away.
Wow, that's a really incredible story. I'm feeling motivated.
We've had just some extraordinary stories of people, and I'll just give you one quick one. A lady came up to us at a race several years ago in Grand Rapids. The biggest 25K in the country is in Grand Rapids. And so this lady came up to us and she met us at the expo, and she was just saw Johnny and just broke down, openly weeping. And it took several minutes for her to compose herself. And finally she said, this took several minutes, but I'll quickly summarize it. She said, I was sitting on my couch and I'd just been to my doctor, and he said, you are, and she said, admittedly, I'm morbidly obese. And the doctor told her, you are not going to live very long. And so she's sitting there feeling sorry for herself. And Johnny's story came on, the ESPN story. She said, I don't watch ESPN that much, but I saw this story. I started watching it. And after watching Johnny finish his mile walk on ESPN and the whole story behind it, she got up and did a small walk that day and then did further and further. And then like a year later, she was signed up and going to do the 5K race on the same day we were going to do the 25K. So you get two vastly different distances, but they all kind of funnel together. They start at different times, and it's, 20,000 people doing this race. You start at different times, but you end all together at one finish line. And when we turned the corner of the 25K race, she turned the corner of the 5K race, and we met up, and we're all, blubbering at that point, walking to the finish line. And she was just couldn't believe it. And she kept saying, Johnny, you saved my life. So those kinds of stories are so inspirational, and you just don't even think about, but you're impacting not only people with special needs, but here's a lady who she just had gotten, in a horrible position, didn't know how to get her way out. And Johnny's story and what he had done and how he overcame his challenges inspired her to overcome her challenges. And here she was doing a 5K race, which would have been unheard of in her life, and she never dreamed she would have done it. So pretty extraordinary things like that happen to us fairly frequently. It's pretty awe-inspiring.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, as we start to wrap up, I'd love to know, where listeners can go to connect with you and, kind of what's your call to action for people.
My website is teamagar.com or johnnyagar.com. They all funnel the same thing, or you can find me on all my social media channels. Should I name those? My Instagram is official Johnny _Agar, or my Twitter is @Agar_John, or just Facebook /Johnny Agar. I love to communicate with all of you there. So and
Johnny's had a lot of fun stories over the course of years. So if you Google Johnny Agar, you'll see some pretty fun things he's been able to be involved in.
And we'll make sure all of those links are in the show notes as well for people to have easy access.
Perfect.
Yeah. Anything else that you'd like to share with listeners, or anything that we didn't ask that we should have?
I don't think so.
I don't think so, but thank you very much for having us on. Emily, it was a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope we inspired your listeners, and thank you for the opportunities that you provide for people. You're very much needed and very much appreciated. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it does show that there are so many resources available to people that they may not be aware of. And, we, like, you would have never thought for us to get involved with triathlons, but there was a group of people, the My Team Triumph group, that work with people with special needs. So there are so many resources, so many opportunities, especially parents of kids with special needs, where you wouldn't even imagine what they might get involved in and where they might have a talent or a passion. So the more you explore those things, the more it opens doors, and using resources, especially things I'm sure you're communicating with other guests of what's available to people, is a huge opportunity for folks, especially parents of kids with a special needs child.
Becki, any final thoughts from you?
No, I think they kind of summed it all up. I think we're just so very fortunate to have your organization and the ADA Act. I think that's been a wonderful opportunity for people to be able to, we have what we've always taught Johnny to advocate for himself. And some people don't have a strong enough voice, or they think they don't. And so having you guys to be able to help them along with that, I think is a great benefit.
Yeah. I think they're great business solutions. If you have more accessibility to things, there's a huge population of people that want to spend their money. And if your business is, open and want to hire people with disabilities, like we have a local organization, the massive grocery store chain Meijer in West Michigan, they're just huge. And the Meijer organization hires several people with special needs, and they're one of the better employers around to accommodate people with special needs, and it just it makes them even a better place for people to spend their money, to shop at, and people that want to work there, whether you're able-bodied or not. So organizations like that, I think, really benefit by opening up to people with special needs, and organizations like yours help to share that kind of information with people.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and best of luck to you in your future endeavors.
Thank you very much.
Emily.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Adventures in Accessibility. Tune in next time for another dive into the unknown.
Adventures in Accessibility is hosted by Emily Schumann, and Jessica Lucinia is our sound engineer. This podcast is a project of the Rocky Mountain ADA Center and is funded under a grant from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, grant number 90DPAD0014. This production is intended solely for entertainment and informal guidance and should not be considered legal advice. The opinions expressed by guests are not necessarily held or endorsed by the Rocky Mountain ADA Center.